I hope you don't mind, my daughter-in-law said, standing in my kitchen uninvited. We've already terminated our lease. The boys need space. This is family property now. She set her oversized purse on my counter, like she owned it. My son stood beside her, arms crossed, not meeting my eyes. He just nodded once small, quiet final. I'd just made the final mortgage payment 2 weeks ago. I'd even saved the confirmation email in a special folder marked Freedom. 40 years of waking up early, working late, clipping coupons, skipping vacations, and patching up old boots instead of buying new ones. 40 years erased in one smug declaration. My hand shook as I picked up my coffee mug, more from the betrayal than the heat. This house isn't family property, I said, slowly trying to keep my voice level. It's mine. Oh, come on, Mom, my son finally said, his tone sliding into that practiced, patronizing calm that made my spine stiffen. You always said this house was for the family. Yes, I replied, setting the mug down. For family dinners, for birthdays, for visits, not for takeover. Shayna scoffed. Don't be dramatic. We're not strangers. We're your family. And you have all this space just sitting here. 2 empty bedrooms, a huge backyard, all for one person. She said one person, the same way someone might say, rotting fruit. We'll just take the upstairs. The boys need their own rooms. You won't even notice us. I laughed under my breath. I notice when someone moves into my home without asking. It's not like that, my son said. We assumed you'd be happy. You've always been generous. Generous. That word again. A word they'd carved hollow over the years, stripping it of its warmth and stuffing it with expectation. I looked between them, both of them, standing in my kitchen like guests who'd arrived with moving trucks instead of gifts. And for the first time, I felt like a stranger in my own house. Later that night, I sat alone at the dining table staring at the paperwork I kept in the bottom drawer. Deeds, receipts, documents no one else had ever touched but me. I hadn't grown up with much. Not a lot of space. Not a lot of peace, and certainly not a lot of choices. That house wasn't just a roof. It was a quiet promise I made to myself decades ago, that I would build something of my own, something no one could take. My late husband Reed and I had started sketching plans on napkins back when we were still renting a cramped duplex. He passed before we ever broke ground, but I kept going. I poured the foundation with borrowed tools, learned to hang drywall from a neighbor, and bartered landscaping jobs for leftover materials. I planted every flower bed myself, azaleas along the driveway, daffodils by the windows, lavender by the porch. I designed the kitchen on graph paper during late nights when I couldn't sleep. The drawers were placed at just the right height for my arthritic wrists. The windows faced east so I could wake up with the light. Everything in that house bore my fingerprint and Reed's spirit. And now my son and his wife, who had never once offered to mow the lawn or fix a loose hinge, had the gall to walk in and call it family property. I had never asked them for help. Not when I lost Reed. Not when I worked 2 jobs to keep up with mortgage payments. And certainly not when I chose to pay for their emergencies over the years, bailouts, babysitting, car repairs. Late rent. Quiet generosity was how I loved. I gave and they took, and I told myself that was what mothers did. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how normal they made it seem. How easy it was for them to claim my space, my work, my history, as if I were just some lonely woman in a too-big house, not the woman who had carried that house through storms and seasons, heartbreak and hope. They hadn't even asked. They'd just assumed. Assumed I would give. Assumed I had no fight left. But they were wrong. I picked up the deed that night, held it under the dining light, and reread the name printed there, mine alone. 3 days after that conversation in my kitchen, Boxes started appearing on my porch. At first I thought it was a mistake. A delivery for a neighbor, maybe. But then I saw the handwriting. My daughter-in-law's sharp, loopy scrawl scrawled across a box labeled Tommy's Winter Clothes. No call, no knock. Just their lives deposited, like I was a storage unit. When I opened the sunroom door, a love seat blocked my path. My love seat. Moved aside to make room for their furniture. I stood there for a long time staring at the new arrangement of my home. Then I heard the back door swing open like it belonged to someone else. We figured it made sense to bring a few things early, my son said. He was balancing a lamp under one arm, his phone in the other hand. You can stay in the guest room for now. That way, we're not rushing the boys. I didn't answer. My silence, apparently, was taken as permission. That afternoon, my house was no longer mine. The boys ran barefoot through the hallway, yelling about who got which bed. My daughter-in-law rearranged my spice rack, muttering that the labels made no sense. My coffee mugs were pushed to the back of the cabinet to make room for cartoon-themed tumblers. They didn't mention my name. Not once. Not as the homeowner. Not as the person who had built this life brick by brick. I heard my daughter-in-law on the phone with someone her mother may be saying, "It's cozy, but we'll make it ours soon." Ours. That night, after the lights had dimmed and the house had quieted into unfamiliar breathing patterns and creaking floors, I sat at my small kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone lukewarm. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't knock on doors and demand anything. Instead, I opened the drawer beside me and took out the red folder, the one marked Deed and Title, the one with the documents they never asked to see. I laid it flat on the table and turned to the tabbed section labeled Transfer Restrictions. The letterhead was still crisp after all these years. My husband's lawyer had said to keep it safe, just in case things ever get messy. I remember the way he said it like he knew the future better than we did. I had filed it away and never thought much about it. Until now. I opened the safe and pulled out the sealed envelope. My fingers hesitated at the flap, but not from fear, just from the weight of what I was about to reawaken. Inside was the revised deed. Filed 5 months after my husband passed it, detailed a single change: my sole ownership. No joint family right of survivorship. No room for claims from children's spouses or next of kin. It was clear, airtight, and legally binding. I laid it flat on the kitchen table, the same one where my daughter-in-law had rearranged my sugar jars. The same table where she had once eaten Thanksgiving pie, before she decided my house was hers for the taking. I made 3 copies of the deed. One went into my main file, one I left with a trusted notary in town, and the third, well, that one was for delivery. But first I sat down and wrote 2 letters. The first to my son was short. Just facts. No emotion. I reminded him that I had not only paid off the house, but built it from the ground up, that it was never his inheritance, never a shared property, and never up for debate. The second to my daughter-in-law was even shorter. You may have mistaken kindness for weakness, but this house is not yours. It never was. I've enclosed something that should clear up the confusion. I folded the copies, slipped them into manila envelopes. The next morning I left them there while I drove into town. I had one more stop to make, one that didn't require paper, just a quiet conversation with a woman who owed me nothing but understood everything, the town clerk. They brought dessert like it was a peace offering. Store-bought strawberry shortcake, her idea of grace. My son passed the whipped cream like nothing had happened. My daughter-in-law refilled water glasses with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her parents sat prim, acting like guests of honor. My grandkids kicked their heels under my table, their laughter bouncing off the walls I built. I let them settle in, let the illusion breathe for one more meal. Then I stood up and slid the manila folder across the table. 12 pages printed and collated. I watched the smirks, the whispers. The moment she leaned over and whispered something to her mother that made them both laugh. But the room changed when I opened my mouth. I read slowly, clearly. My voice didn't shake, though hers would soon. This document certifies that sole legal ownership and right of occupancy rests with Veradel Murney. No party relation or otherwise may establish residents' use of space or transfer of address to the property unless explicitly granted in writing by the title holder. Silence, except the faint clink of her fork dropping onto the plate. I continued. Any encroachment on the property may be subject to civil litigation. Then I looked at her. Not at my son, not at her parents. At her. You cannot live here, I said. You were never invited. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came, just the sound of my son exhaling and looking away. Her mother reached for her hand, but it trembled too hard to catch. I've paid your rent. I've watched your boys. I've opened my doors more times than I can count, but I will not be erased from my own home. I gathered the pages back into the folder slowly, deliberately, as if they weighed everything they had ignored. I'm not asking for understanding, I said. I'm stating fact. Then I stood, walked to the sink and rinsed my plate under cold water. Behind me, no one spoke. I stepped outside with my mug of coffee and stopped mid-step. The air was cool, but my skin burned. My hands gripped the ceramic tighter as my eyes scanned the wreckage. My lavender rose gone. The boxwoods we planted the summer after my husband passed ripped out. My rose arbor collapsed into splinters. Ceramic pots, shattered soil kicked into the wind. Even the bench he had built was on its side, one leg missing. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stood there a long time, letting the silence speak for itself. Then I went inside, turned on my desktop, and opened the security system folder. I'd installed cameras 2 years ago after someone broke into the neighbor's shed. No one ever asked about them, not my son, not her. They never thought to. I cued the recording from the night before. There they were. Flashlight beams bobbing across my lawn. My son's voice clear as day. She thinks she owns everything. Laughter. Then the crash of a planter being tipped. My daughter-in-law kicked over the herb bed with both feet. Let's see her serve anyone coffee now. They thought they were clever, destroying what they assumed would break me. But I'd already survived worse. I'd survived grief so deep it knocked the breath from my lungs. I'd survived silence. I could survive this. Still it cut. That garden was more than flowers. It was my sanctuary, my proof that life could grow again after loss. And they knew that. I saved the footage to a USB drive, then made 2 copies. One would go to the sheriff's office. The other I planned to deliver that one personally. I brewed another pot of coffee and sat by the window watching the wind tug at the shredded remains of my garden. I didn't bother cleaning anything up yet. Let the damage sit. Let it breathe. Let them think I was retreating. I wasn't. I was documenting, preparing. Because next time I faced them, I wouldn't just bring a warning, I'd bring evidence. And this time, I wouldn't be the one crying. I didn't hesitate. That morning, I walked into the sheriff's station with the flash drive in my coat pocket and a printout of the property deed in my hand. The deputy at the desk raised an eyebrow when I told him what was on it, but when he saw the footage, he nodded grimly. We'll file this under criminal mischief and property destruction, he said. Should be enough for charges. I left a second copy with my lawyer just in case. A third went to the homeowners association. Then I sent another to the church board. I wasn't trying to cause a scandal, but I wouldn't let them twist this in private anymore. If they were going to play dirty, I'd respond with clarity and light. By the end of the week, I'd made 12 copies. One went to my safe, another to my backup drive. The rest strategic. A neighbor who always accidentally overheard things. My old friend Myrtle, who ran the PTA back in the day. Even Pastor Edens got one. That Sunday, I sat in my usual pew, Second from the back left side, where the windows caught the light just right. I arrived early and left the flash drive in a sealed envelope with Deacon Hale. I didn't say a word, just pressed it into his hand and walked on. When they arrived, her face was already pale. My daughter-in-law wore a tight sweater and a tighter smile, but I could see the panic in her shoulders. My son didn't meet my eyes. The pastor paused mid-sermon when he saw me. His gaze flicked to the envelope now resting beside the pulpit. His voice trembled slightly before regaining composure, but I saw it, he knew. By the end of the service, whispers had started. A few glances. One woman patted my shoulder on the way out, murmuring, "Good for you." I didn't need to say a word. Back at home, I poured a cup of coffee and walked through the torn garden. I hadn't replanted yet. I wanted them to see what they'd done and what I'd build again on my own terms. And tomorrow, I'd begin again, starting with a letter. There was a knock on my door just after sunset. I'd been sitting in the den sipping my coffee, sorting through seed catalogs when I heard it, slow, hesitant. I opened the door, and there she was, my daughter-in-law. No makeup, no designer handbag, no performative posture. Just a woman with swollen eyes and trembling hands clutching a jacket too thin for the cold. She didn't speak right away, just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, lips pressed tight. Then she broke. Not dramatically like before, not the crocodile tears she used at dinner tables or to sway my son. These tears were quieter, heavier, real. "I know you probably hate me," she whispered, her voice raw, "but we have nowhere else to go. Marcus can't find work. The boys are sleeping on a pullout at my parents'. They're yelling all the time. It's not safe." I said nothing. We shouldn't have done what we did. I know that now. But please, just until we figure things out. Just a few nights. I studied her. I saw the desperation, the exhaustion, and for a moment I remembered being her age, stretched thin, uncertain. But there was a difference. I had never tried to steal someone's home. "I'm not letting you back in," I said quietly. "But I'll wire you $800. For a motel. That's all." She blinked, stunned. "That's it. That's more than you gave me when you walked in and said this was family property." I stepped back and gently closed the screen door between us. She nodded slowly. "Thank you," she murmured. "Really?" I didn't reply. I just closed the door. Inside, I opened my banking app and sent the money. Not out of guilt or pity, but because I wanted it done. No strings, no returns, just distance. The porch light stayed on until well past midnight, but no one knocked again. The next morning I opened the curtains, looked out at the garden I hadn't touched since the damage, and picked up my gloves. The garden took longer to heal. Some plants never came back. I mourned the climbing roses most 4 years to get them that full. But the snapdragons were tougher than they looked. They bloomed again, smaller, humbler, but alive. I salvaged what I could, composted the rest. Life goes on. I called a contractor to build a proper fence, sturdy and tall. Not to keep out strangers, but to set boundaries for the people who once called themselves family. I replaced the front locks and the gate latch. Gave a new key only to the neighbor across the street, an old friend from church who brought me stew every third Sunday. At the post office, I filed a change return, anything addressed to Marcus or Shayna. When the first envelope came thick official, I drew a red line across the front and slid it right back in the box. Neighbors stopped whispering after that. One by one, they returned with warmth. Some brought home-baked bread. Others just stood by the fence, awkward at first, then grateful when I waved them in. One couple helped me replant my herb corner. Someone left a gift card for the nursery on my porch, with no note, just a sprig of mint attached with twine. I found peace again, not the quiet that comes from giving in, but the deeper quiet that rises from knowing you were right to fight for your space. And somewhere in that calm between the mending and the mulching, I found myself again. The sun hit the side steps just right that morning. I tied on my gloves, bent low to the soil, and began planting something new. It's been 6 months. No calls, no visits, no sideways glances at church, because they don't show their faces there anymore. The silence stretches long and thin, and I let it. Last week my lawyer called. Just a heads up, he said. Marcus and Shayna filed a challenge against the deed, claimed familial rights. I didn't flinch. I stirred my coffee and waited for the rest. They attached nothing. No documents, no contracts, just a statement. And the judge dismissed it in under 10 minutes. I thanked him and hung up. No questions, no outrage. That part of me, the one who used to seek understanding, had gone quiet. The deed still bears my name, only mine. The ink is dark, the signature steady. My husband's notes, written long ago in the margins of an early draft, still sit folded in my drawer. For you. Always. Some mornings, I sit on the porch with a mug in hand, watching the new tulips bloom. They're early this year, yellow, orange, and 2 stubborn pink ones that came from a mixed bulb bag I planted last fall. They don't match. I like them more for it. The wind carries a bit of dust from the road, and I breathe it in like memory. Not nostalgia, not longing, just the truth of where I've been. I wonder sometimes not whether they'll come back, but whether they ever really saw me. Saw the girl who built something from nothing, the widow who stayed and saved, the woman who said yes to helping until she learned how to say no. But I don't linger in that wondering. I walk the paths I laid with my own hands, sit by the planter box where the rosemary used to grow, and sip my coffee from the chipped mug that says good fences make good neighbors. A joke from a friend that's truer than it looks. They tried to take my home, but what they could never touch, what they never understood, was that it wasn't just a house. It was a life built brick by brick in my name always.